Hi, Sara.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. Give me just a minute. I'm going to invite myself up on stage with you.
Okay.
Okay. Hello.
Hi, nice to see
How are
you.
you?
I'm great. It's
Good.
fun
It's good to
to,
see you.
I was gonna say it's fun to learn a new platform with
I
you.
know. I love it. I love Fireside. It's really fun. So I think we're going to go ahead. I know. Yay. We get a couple of cheers for that. I think from Anissa, who's been coming to some of our events. Nice to see you again, Anissa. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I know people will be trickling in, but I'd like to get started on time so that we can be respectful of Sara's time as well as our audience members. So welcome and hello, Firesiders. Welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the superpower of books. I'm your host, Susan McBeth, and I'm delighted today to be hosting USA Today bestselling author Sara Ackerman, who is here to chat about her new historical novel, The Codebreaker's Secret, which is very exciting. And it was just released, I think, a couple days ago, right?
Yeah, Tuesday.
On Tuesdays. So this is exciting. This is actually just part one in a brand new series we're doing for 6 weeks, where each week we're going to be chatting with a different author and helping you come up with 6 new books to add to your fall reading list. But before I introduce Sara, I wanted to welcome everybody first. Those of you in our live studio audience, we're glad to see you there. As you know, on Fireside, you can invite yourself up on stage anytime, ask questions of Sara, chat with her, or just to say hello if you're a huge fan of hers. I'd like to also welcome everybody who is listening in on our public profile page, and also to those of you who are listening in on our social media channels. And did you know that the beauty of Fireside is you can also broadcast live any of our shows? All you have to do, you can see in the audience below, Amber has a little globe icon above her name, and that's because she is broadcasting live. All you have to do is go to the little hamburger button, the round circle in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, hit broadcast to the world, and you can share with your friends and family as well. Our approximate 45-minute chat today with Sara is intended as a conversation. So as I mentioned, if you're in the live studio audience, you can listen in anytime, join us on stage. You can wait till the end. We'll have a formal Q&A, but feel free to jump up anytime if you have a pressing question. And if you haven't ordered a copy of the book, The Codebreaker's Secret, you can do so on our website, and you will get a signed copy by the author. That link, adventuresbythebook.com, is in the fortune cookie part of your screen, in the center of your screen. It will be shipped to you directly. So, as I previously mentioned, Sara is a USA Today best-selling author. Her new book, The Codebreaker's Secret, is a riveting novel of World War II era Hawaii. It is a dazzling story of love and intrigue and a decades-old mystery set during America's darkest hour, involving a brilliant female codebreaker, an unbreakable Japanese naval code, and a pilot on a top secret mission that could change the course of World War II. We're delighted to have you here today, Sara, on Fireside. Congratulations on the book. Again, as I mentioned, it just released 2 days ago. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be.
Yeah, what time is it in Hawaii, by the way?
It's 1 o'clock.
Oh, in the afternoon. Okay, great. So it's early for you, but anyone who wants to get out a glass of wine and join us, or actually, if we're talking Hawaii, we should be getting a Mai Tai or a pina colada, right?
No, I should have thought of that.
I know. That sounds really good right now. It's really hot and humid in San Diego, and I could use a cool, refreshing drink.
Yeah, it's hot here too. We've had great cool weather, and then today and yesterday it's just been like
Oh, sounds familiar. Well, I always like to get started by learning a little bit about our authors before they became successful writers. So, you were born and raised in Hawaii. Lucky you. Can you talk a bit about your first exposure to books and how you came to become a reader and a writer? And if there was someone that inspired you along the way? And I'm also curious, too. Is it harder to sit and read books as a child when you live such a stunning place and you want to be out at the beach every day?
Um, well, I'll start with the first part of the question first. My mother was a teacher, and as was my grandmother and my grandfather, and so I grew up as an early reader, I think, and so I was really exposed. We always had books in the house. My mother actually taught kindergarten, so she got me into books early. I remember I was really into the Bernstein Bears and um, all the Charlotte's Web and all those great books of the 70s and 60s, I guess. Um, and so that was when I first began reading. And I think I always just loved reading. Then I read all the Nancy Drew books, at least, probably at least 2 or 3 times each. And then I just graduated up from there. I also loved writing. So I would write, my mom, I think because she was a teacher, she would keep all of our old little, writings and she'd rewrite them in a notebook. And I have some fun little creative stories that I wrote when I was 10 or even younger. So I have that, I guess, creative drive in me. But I think it was hard being away because I did always want to go to the beach to balance those for sure.
Yeah, we have a lot of similar. I was a Nancy Drew, Berenstain Bears, Charlotte's Web fan as well. A lot of similar favorites. And I just realized this, and I wanted to remind anybody who's new in our studio audience, I make it sound like we're on TV, in our virtual audience, or even those listening live on our public profile page, you can actually take your fingers and touch your screen and stretch out the images. So, when I first started doing Fireside, there were these teeny tiny little heads. I could barely see the author until I learned that, and then you can see Sara much better. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that. And I also curious, is it as magical to live in Hawaii as the rest of the world imagines it will be? I mean, what kind of environment is it for a writer?
Um, I think it's as magical. For me, I think one of the hard parts is I saw how it used to be when I was a kid, and I see it now. But I think this is the case of anywhere, less crowded, just more laid back, less traffic, which is all an issue now. But I live on the Big Island now instead of Oahu, which is a much pace, much more open space. And I live in a town that's at a higher elevation, a little ranching town, Waimea, and it's very cold and cool up here. So this is actually the perfect writing environment. We have a fireplace, it's rainy and foggy, and I actually find it a lot easier to write here than I did when I was on Oahu, living down by the beach. Not because I was at the beach, just because it was hot, and I don't know. It wasn't quite as conducive to writing.
Yeah, well, when you're speaking to a SoCal girl, so when you say no traffic, boy, you are speaking my language, honey.
Yeah.
I wish we could have that same problem.
Yeah, it was a real problem for sure.
Yeah. So, well, I know you're clearly in love with your home state, and I can certainly see why. But you're so far away from what do you call it? The upper 48, the mainland. I don't know what you call it. That
And we call it the mainland.
the mainland. Okay. I imagine you don't actually get to do much of a book tour because I imagine publishers are not sending you that far away. And so when you publish a book, how do Hawaiian authors get word out about their book, and how do you connect with readers?
Well, for the first two books, it was more challenging because I think actually the pandemic, in a way, it brought us all Zoom calls and all the virtual meetings and events. So I didn't have any tours. I just, I went to bookstores around, which are very supportive, and they would have little events for me. And I would have to do a lot of reaching out to people or like hotels, where I would want to maybe have an event. So it is challenging. I see all my author friends going here, going there, doing all these fun tours up, up the coast in California or the West Coast or East Coast. And, I envy them definitely. Um, but I guess it's just I've gotten used to it. And my publisher, they're pretty good at getting the word out too, fortunately.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm always fascinated by the career trajectory of writers, which seems to be quite eclectic. And I know you studied journalism, which one might expect of a writer, but you also earned a graduate degree in psychology and also in Chinese medicine. Tell us how that came about. And do you draw upon either of those or both of those fields when you study or write your books?
Yeah, my dad always said I was just going to be a perpetual student. Uh, my the journalism degree kind of was more in relations, so I actually ended up doing some graphic design for a few years. But I had always been very interested in psychology, and so I ended up getting a master's in psychology and specializing in school counseling. So I started working in schools, and I was in the public school system for a time, and then I made the shift from counseling to teaching because I was ready for a teacher. They needed a Spanish teacher. I was taking Spanish. It was completely just full lecture, but I did that for a few years. And I taught online for a few years, and at that point, I was pretty ready to get out of just working for the public school system. I guess there was out there, and so I decided I was going to go to acupuncture school, which was an evening program. And so for the first time, my adult life, I had my days free, or at least part of my days free. And so at that point, where I actually started my first novel, um, and I actually wrote 3 novels before my first published. So I was writing, pitching agents, getting rejected, and then right around a couple months after I finished acupuncture school, is when I got my agent. Yeah.
And I've heard you say that you blame Hawaii for your addiction to writing. Um, I mean, you write about love and life and about all their messy and beautiful imperfections. So, how does Hawaii figure into all of that?
I think because for me, as you probably know if you've read any of my books or listened to any of my talks, is that I grew up here and my parents and grandparents were here during the war. And so I was always hearing their stories. And, back when I grew up, it wasn't too far. I think we were 30, 40 years after and World War II. And so people just, if you were from Hawaii, you knew a lot about the war in general. And so that was kind of always, I think, in the back of my mind. And then my grandmother was a great storyteller, a teacher, and she had talked about this line all the time that the Marines had. And so when I was writing the novels, I was interested in this lion, and and then from there, I kind of formed a story around that. Um, but I think it. I think my love for Hawaii also is just I've grown up being outdoors my whole life. So I've grown up with the World War II aspect. Um, my dad took us on hikes, took us on adventures all over the Big Island, the volcano, and I think I just wanted to share. Like it's such a special and it's so multifaceted. I think people just think of it as the go to the beach in Hawaii and drink mai tais on the beach and go to luau's, and it's just so much more to it than that. And so I've really been able to delve into it, with my 5 novels. They're all World War II stories, all Pearl Harbor stories. I think it's just been nice to be able to share that with the world. These stories are very little known, very unknown by so many people.
Well, since you mentioned your 5 novels, let's go ahead and dig right into your newest book, The Codebreaker's Secret. So, without giving too much away, because we want people to purchase the book and to read it, can you give us a little teaser into what we have to look forward to and what the plot is and what it's generally about?
Yes, I can. You did a great job, I thought, in the beginning, probably better than I can. It's funny. People always say you can. I can write the whole novel, but it's so hard for me to talk about it in just a few sentences. Um, but it is. It's about a female breaker who comes to Hawaii, and she is working on JN-25, which is the Japanese naval code, which was believed to be unbreakable. You know, the Japanese Navy was very, I think, overconfident in that it was unbreakable, which I think, led to it being actually somewhat. So she comes to Hawaii to work in the dungeon, which is legendary station high school, where all the code breaking took place. That was very instrumental actually, to us, ending up victorious in the Pacific. But she ends up meeting a pilot who was best friends with her late brother because her brother passed away in the attack on Pearl Harbor. So these two end up bonding over the brother, the shared love of the brother. And meanwhile, there is a mysterious disappearance in this storyline, and that mysterious disappearance also is tied to the 1964 storyline, which is set at the Monaco Beach Hotel. So you've got these two disappearances years apart, and that's what ties the two stories together. So the 19
Sarah, can I interrupt you for just a
Sure.
second? Are you, do you have two devices going? Because you're cutting in and out, and I hear a little feedback, and sometimes that happens when there's two devices going.
Oh, I don't.
No. Okay. All right. Go ahead then. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Are you able to hear me at all?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's just a little in and out, and there's a little bit of feedback. So,
Oh,
but we can still hear you.
okay. So yeah, I where was I? The Mauna Kea Beach Hotel storyline is about the set at the grand opening of the hotel, which was in 1965, and this was Rockefeller's Grand Hotel. At the time, it was the most expensive hotel in the world, and it was a pretty big deal here in Hawaii and in the world. And so I've always wanted to write a story set. I love it there, and so I have these two mysteries going on, and in the end, they merge. And I'll have to read to find out what happens.
Yeah, and so your book is a historical novel as well as a mystery. And so, how did you write to intertwine the two so successfully? Because I've read the book and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. I at first this is my first dual timeline novel. I really was nervous about it, but I do love a good timeline. So I thought, well, I usually have several different ideas for stories in my head at a time, and oftentimes I know each one in and of itself is enough for a novel. So like how to connect these stories, and that was the same with one. Um, and so for I ended up asking other authors how they did it. Do you write the whole thing, the whole first one at once, or do you write one chapter and then write, the next storyline? I got varying answers, but what I realized I had to do was just write the 1943 storyline because I needed to know what happened. You know, I usually have an outline before I start the book, but I don't know everything that's going to happen. And so I wrote the whole 1943 storyline, and then I wove the next one in the 1965 storyline because there's a lot of stuff to give away, and so it's very tricky on what to put where.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you too about your dual narrative format and how you wove those together, and which one you came up first, or did you come up with them at the same time?
I think I had so I knew in my mind when I was trying to come up with this fifth book that I somehow wanted to set it at the Mauna Kea Beach Hotel, and 20 years after the war. So I figured that wouldn't be too hard to connect them. And I also was really interested I read about um, this operation that took place during the war. The pilot was sent on the secret mission. And that I read a book about that, which was fascinating to me. It was, I don't think, a well-known, situation. And so I knew I wanted to also somehow include that. And so that was the section, the male love interest. But when I was working on the lieutenant's nurse, my second book, the lieutenant was a linguist in typo, and he was instrumental in helping decode the Midway message that helped us win the battle of Midway. And so I learned a lot about the dungeon, which is what they were calling Station Hypo at the time in Pearl Harbor. And I thought, I would love to write a story more focused on that, with more about that, but have a woman involved in it. But I knew that there hadn't been any women actually in the dungeon. But what I did learn was there were many women in Washington who were working on this Japanese naval code JN 25. In fact, there was over 10,000 women in Washington doing breaking. And so I was able to use that in fiction, so I could have my woman in there. But there really were women very, working on these codes. So then I just was able to sort of weave it together. I'm not sure how it happened. That's kind of the magic of writing,
The magic of your writing.
the subconscious mind works it out somehow.
So, do you feel that growing up in Hawaii, did you have more access to information about Pearl Harbor or less because it wasn't talked about? Because I'm curious when you talked about the Japanese code and the dungeon and things. I mean, I had never heard of those things before. And so I'm just curious how you learned of them. I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but I'm just curious growing up as a child, what they teach in Hawaiian schools about Pearl Harbor and World War II.
Mm-hmm. I think I was probably in school, it was just a lot of what everyone else was taught. I was not a good history student at all. So I think my interest was more just from my family side. And then also when I had to write my first novel, I learned a lot. I've gotten some great books. And then, my mother, my father, when I was writing those, were still alive. And so I would talk to them. I had my uncle recorded some video because he was a little older during the war about, what he remembered. But most of what I learned was definitely through research. Then my father, he was the class of 1952, I think, at Winnipeg. And so they were about 10 during the attack. And his classmates had a book that they put together of his classmates' recollections of where they were when Pearl Harbor got attacked. And so there's a lot of great information in there as well, just firsthand accounts of. So when you read those, it triggers questions in your mind. And I think one of the most surprising and interesting things was when I was looking up for the lieutenant's nurse was that, the Lurline, the Matson ship, was on its way here, and a few days before the attack. And they picked up these strange radio signals about a large fort, ships that are moving across the Pacific Hawaii. And they were able to kind of record it, or I guess they had it all down in the captain's log. But then when they turned it into the military after arriving, I guess it disappeared, allegedly. And so that was really fascinating to me. And that kind of nothing I had ever learned in school, that, there was a lot of this knowledge about the attack on Pearl Harbor. We were months or even a year before the actual attack, people were told to build storage shelters here, we knew that something was possible, very possible, and very likely. So that was kind of interesting to me in terms of my education. Um, I realized it wasn't quite as just out of the blue as we have been led to believe.
Yeah, and I know you've made several allusions to this. In fact, you talked about, that there were actually no female code breakers in the dungeon in Hawaii, but you fictionalized that part of it. And so I'm curious, as a historical fiction writer, where do you draw the line between, fictionalizing things or, keeping to the facts? Because, I've heard some writers say, well, they got to keep as close to the facts as possible so the story is credible, but they want to add elements that they either don't know about, or like you wanted to imagine women in the dungeon. So how do you address that as a writer?
It can be tricky, but especially what I'm always really careful about is sticking to the line of actual events. So I'm careful about sticking to the actual events, or like the Enterprise. The Enterprise was out at sea, or all the carriers were out at sea during the attack. Um, just those kind of details. As far as characters, my characters are all fictional. So, taking these fictional characters and placing them in a real situation or a real event. And so I feel like that gives me more leeway than if I'm dealing with actual characters.
And so your characters are fictional, but there are real life people in the book, like Lawrence Rockefeller and the building of his Mauna Kea beach hotel on the Big Island.
Mhm.
What can you tell us about that resort? Because he had this vision that was pretty innovative for the time. Can you talk a little bit about that part of the story and his project?
Yeah, it was fascinating because I know, my grandparents had lived here and were at that grand opening, and that was what sparked the idea. But where he built the hotel along that coast, if you've ever been there, unless you're right on the water, it is like wasteland. It's lava, dead grass, and kiawe trees pretty much. Now there's goats. But if you were to be anywhere along that coast, you would think this is definitely not a place for a hotel. And even before he built the hotel, he built a golf course there, like a world-class golf course. But he had a vision. He saw the actual beautiful white crescent-shaped vision. So he he built the golf course. That I think he had 9 different architect companies, come up with their designs for the hotel, and he really wanted it to just blend in with the elements. And he did a. People were not happy here in Hawaii, as they never are when there's a hotel going up on a beach. Um, Back then, I think it was a little different. Still, it was out at that point. It was pretty much out in the Parker Ranch land. But I think if anyone was to build a hotel there, people were happy that it was that, because he did, a spectacular job of it.
Is that the hotel that has a tram that runs around the whole resort?
Mm-mm.
No, okay, because I went with my husband to a conference there many, many years ago, and it was just this enormous resort that was so big that you had to take a tram around it. And I know it was
I think that's probably at Waikoloa. Those are newer. The Mauna Kea was the first one along the
got it,
coastline. There
got
wasn't even he helped build the road to Kona. He helped refurbish. He kind of refurbished this Hawaiian full of heiau up the way, and he hired women. He hired a lot of women. He hired a lot of local people, primarily local people, and so I think overall it was a good thing for the community.
Yeah. And I just want to remind anyone who's just joining us, we're talking with USA Today bestselling author Sara Ackerman about her new book, The Codebreaker's Secret. And a reminder that anybody in our virtual audience can invite yourself up on stage anytime to ask questions. Lily in our audience asked a question. Did the haunting feel at the Pearl Harbor Memorial prompt thoughts on the stories behind the lives lost?
Well, it's definitely haunting and very sobering and solemn when you're there. As if you're there, I think that more it was just me wanting to share the stories of these people, these unknown stories, and not just the big battles. You know, it was the people, the smaller people, the smaller stories, the people of Hawaii that really lived through so much that I just really wanted to share.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I noticed about your characters is many of them play chess. Chess seems to be an integral part, and I'm curious, why was that integral to your story, and where did that come from?
Well, I like chess. I'm definitely not like a great chess player, but I do enjoy it. I think it was around the time where I was watching the Queen's Gambit when I was writing it.
Uh,
So that might have been, and plus I felt like there was a bit of that strategy going on in, what was happening, trying to figure out what was going on.
You'll have to be quiet because I'm going to go on speaker.
and whoops. Yeah, I heard somebody talking. Sorry. So that's interesting how a writer's mind works, is that you're writing the story and you're just watching the Queen's Gambit, and this idea comes to you and say, hey, this really makes sense with the whole strategy thing, because it made sense to me too as well. But I thought, how did she think of that? It's interesting.
It happens a lot. I have a book, one of my unpublished novels. I could not figure out one part of the book, that's just how a certain thing was working. And then I was reading another book about the same time, in the 1800s, and there was my answer. It was so perfect. So things come upon randomly.
It's those wonderful writers' minds that we all admire. I see that Debbie has joined us up on stage. And sorry, I muted you, Debbie, because we were getting background noise from you, but you can unmute yourself and ask your question now.
Hi, sorry about that. I've got a fan going here. You can probably hear that. Hi, Sarah. It's really nice to spend time with you. I really enjoyed your book, and I'm really glad you're here to talk about it.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, a couple questions. First, I was going to ask too about the chess, because I was wondering, are you a chess player? How did you know the moves and the strategies you put into the book?
I know, I was really impressed by that too. It was like, oh yeah, pawn 1 to k2, or I don't know all the chess buttons, but
Well, yeah, I definitely had to look those up. I'm not that sophisticated chess player.
Well, you had us fooled. But the other question then is about the same thing with the code lingo that you use, the terminology and understanding, like this is a 5-digit number, three, and blah, blah. How did you know all that about the code breaking?
That was the hard part. I think this was probably the hardest, right, because of the code breaking, because of the dual timeline. Radar Girls was challenging as well, learning the technical details, but I had to do just a lot of research. Maybe is where there was a lot of great, just very in-depth articles. There's so much information on World War II out there that it was very helpful for me to read. But I trying to understand these codes and then trying to understand how one would even go about breaking them was really mind-boggling to me. And so that took a while. And just it gave me also an appreciation of what these women had to go through. I mean, how smart they must have been. It is extremely, extremely challenging and complex. And um, so that was challenging. That was very hard to do. And I was hoping I couldn't find any actual code breakers to read it to, um, you know, as an expert. But I did have a few, kind of older, smart people that are at least more in the know than I am. Read it.
Well, you made it sound quite believable. So
Thank you. And it's hard, you don't want to bore people with all the nitty gritty details about it as well,
yeah,
but it needs to be told.
I think I needed to understand just how complex it was. Like it really like a needle in a haystack. I'm imagining. I can't even imagine how complex that was. And I've read other books that talk about code breaking things. So that was interesting. And I really get the impression from the book. I mean, it's clear that you're a native and that, your descriptions of the landscape and just the lifestyle clearly seemed to be authentic, and appreciated that. I really got a good visual as I was reading those kind of things. And I'm just kind of curious, is there part of you, are there some of your personal character traits in um, Isabel, or I'm guessing yes.
You know, everyone always asks that, and I'm sure that there probably are. I'm not consciously doing it, with any of my characters, but even I was just reading someone today saying that, it was a few decades before they realized that they've written themselves into all of their characters, really. And I think I notice I'll be writing something, and it's not till I'm halfway through the book where I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how did I not know that this is so what's going on in my life right now? Or like in my third book, I was writing about a father that had just died, and my father had just died. And it was weird how it was like I had it blocked somehow, you know. This was me kind of writing about my father. So I'm sure there are elements of me in there. I'm definitely probably not as brilliant as Isabel. And then Lou, I kind of based on one of my, sometimes I'll base people on friends as well. So just her personality. Yeah.
Well, it was really well written, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie. Thanks for your questions and for joining us on stage. And I was just thinking as you were talking about that, the code breakers, that I'm a puzzle person. Every morning I can't start my day off unless I have my Sudokus and my crossword puzzles and my crypto quicks. And I was thinking every morning when I do those crypto quick, if I don't solve it immediately, it makes me crazy. And that's just for fun. I can't imagine the pressure these people were under, that, people's lives were at stake here if they didn't solve these puzzles. I can't even imagine what it was like for them.
Well, I'm sure you would have been recruited, because I know they were always recruiting women that really liked to do crossword puzzles, those kinds of things. But you're right. And like what they say about the code breaking is it's not an instantaneous thing. It's kind of layered years and maybe years of building your knowledge and building, just picking up subtle clues, and then you're in the shower and suddenly it hits you, the idea, whatever the answer. So
Yeah, and you look for those patterns, but you really have to know the language well to look for those patterns and commonly used letters and
well, and this
combinations.
was a numeric code. But they also had the IBM machines at that, later. And then in Station Hypo, they had the code breakers, that they had the they had the linguists. So the linguists then, translate from Japanese. It was a huge operation with some very brilliant minds. They say that there's in one of the books that pretty much the war was won in the dungeon. The Pacific War was won in the dungeon, which is,
It's pretty incredible.
yeah.
Yeah, and I see that Anissa has been patiently awaiting on stage. And you know what, Anissa, I forgot to do this with Debbie, but I can invite you to go on camera. So let me see if I can figure out how to do that so we can see your smiling face as we're chatting. And then you'll just have to accept. So I sent you an invite. Let's see if this works so we can get 3 videos on stage. There we go. Oh, you're in the dark. There she is. Hi, Anissa. Nice to see you again.
Hello.
Welcome. Did you have a question or a comment for Sara?
We can't hear you though. You must be on mute. Or I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sara, I've read Radar Girls, but I haven't had the chance to read this one yet. So it's just more of a broader question of with historical fiction, which is probably my favorite genre. When you're researching, how do you know that you have enough for a book, and you can kind of stop your research and you know that you have enough for that book?
That's a great question. I think usually there's one or two novel, or maybe a novel, but usually a nonfiction that I've found that's really specific about what I'm writing about. So I'll usually read one or two books like that, cover to cover. And then I think I also have my kind of bigger World War II books that I feel like I've pretty much almost read all the way through by now. And once I read those first two books and maybe do a little digging around on the internet, I'll just start, because there's a lot of times I won't know what the question is or what I need to know until I'm actually in the story. So it's usually several months of actual maybe reading and researching before I start writing. But more than that, my mind's been kind of trying to figure out little story angles.
Did that answer your question, Anissa?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us on stage. And as always, it's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And Sara, can we really talk about some important stuff now? What is up with mango bread? I keep seeing that on all your social media posts, and now I'm dying for some mango bread.
Well, my the cookbook book club, the book club cookbook, I will say it backwards. They were doing a little bit of promotion of my book, and they had me come up with some recipes. So I came up with mango bread, and my dad used to make mango bread, because I think I mention it towards the end of the book. So that is one of my favorite recipes. Love that.
Is that in the book, or where can we find that recipe?
It is. I on my Instagram link tree in my bio, you can find it there, or the book club cookbook.
Well, that's a good time for us to have you share where we can find you on social media, or
So I am on Instagram. That's kind of, I feel like that's the platform I'm mostly on, and that is Sara Ackerman Books. So at Sara Ackerman Books on Instagram. Facebook and Twitter, I think, are Ackerman Books. I just joined TikTok, and so I've got a few things there as well, but I'm not I'm very new to it.
But Instagram's where we can find your mango bread recipe.
Yeah, and then my website is ackermanbooks.com.
Okay, and also now you're on Fireside, so anybody can click on Sara's icon and you can follow her so that anytime she comes back, and I hope you do come back again, you can get notice of when she's going to be speaking. You can also click on my link. We do Adventures by the Book events almost weekly with different authors. If you follow us, you'll get notification of our upcoming events. So I'm dying to make some mango bread and eat that. I was going to eat it with your book, but I erased through your book before I could get the recipe. So
yeah, it's a great summer breakfast, dessert, whatever. It's perfect.
Yeah. And I just wanted to remind everyone, we only have about 5 minutes left. So if you have pressing questions or just want to say hi or chat to Sara, now's the time to invite yourself up on stage as we close down the show with the last few questions. I once heard an author say that she writes books. This was a question somebody asked her, why do you write books? And she says, I think I write to just make better sense of the world. And that answer just really stuck with me, because I kind of think that's why I read books too, is, to make better sense of the world. And I'm wondering, why do you write?
Well, I think that definitely is part of it. I also write, people always say write the story that only you can write as well. And I think I just have these stories in me. And as a writer, even though you have an outline, you still have really no idea what's going to happen when you start writing, So even though it's hard, when I sit down in the morning, I don't know what's going to really happen, and so it's fun, it's addicting. It's like, okay, what's going to happen next? I've got these characters that I love, and let's see what's going to happen. So in that regards, I think it's just the same as reading. It's like you want to see what's going to happen next.
And so that's why you write. What do you want readers to get out of your books?
Well, I would love for them to learn, like I said, it's shining a light on little known stories. But just, I feel like I like to bring uplifting stories to the world, to share about love and animals. I always have animals in my stories. And, there's so much darkness, and my books are not that. I mean, they are, there can be heartbreak during the, certain parts of the books. But I just, I feel like I would like to just bring these inspiring stories to light.
Yeah, well, we enjoy reading them. And I know that a lot of times our audience members are aspiring writers themselves. And I'm wondering if you have, now that you've achieved success, you've published, what, 5 books, or you're USA Today bestselling author, do you have any words of wisdom you can impart to aspiring writers?
Well, the first thing that I heard, or the most helpful thing, was always stop right in the middle of a scene, never stop at the ending, so that when you start the next day, you have a place to, a jumping off point that's easy to start from, which was absolutely very, very helpful.
That's
I
great.
use that every day. I never stop right at the end. I always kind of stop where it's like something's happening or something's about to happen, so it's easy to keep writing. And then the other thing is just, you just have to put in the time. I've written, you have to just write even if you're not feeling like it. It's, if you want it to be a job. I've written through sickness, I've written through my parent, dying parents, and just all kinds of things. And I have not felt like writing, or the pandemic, that was really challenging to write through as well. So it's just, you just sit down, and sometimes it might take a little while to get into your story, but if you just sit there, I feel like the words will come. And so that's really
Great
important.
advice. Yeah, I like the end in the middle. I never thought about that before, and I've never heard an author say that. So I really like that. It makes
It's,
perfect sense.
and then my motto, I had a post-it on my door when I was writing, before I got published for a couple of years. That was, it took me 5 years before I got an agent. Patience and perseverance. It's what it really is, what it takes, what it brings.
I tell everybody that publishing is an industry rife with rejection. So you have to develop a thick skin and prepare to be rejected over and over and over again. And if you really have the passion for it, you'll keep going, right?
Yeah, I mean, even when you're a published author, I've had a story a couple of years ago that I'd written. I'd already written this book, in between a couple books, and it's still not published. I mean, because it wasn't in the historical fiction genre. So hopefully, I can someday get it published. But it's never just, you haven't ever just made it. You got to keep at it. It's always work.
For sure. Well, I know that we're out of time unless anybody has a last minute question they can ask. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask you if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to chat about, share. Um,
Not off the top of my head. I feel like we've covered a lot. I just, I love writing, and I'm just so thankful that people want to read what I'm writing. So I'm really appreciative to be here.
Thank you. And for those of you who are in a book club, we have a program called Novel Network, and Sara is a member of Novel Network. And you can go to novelnetwork.com and you can schedule book club visits. I know she's in Hawaii, but thanks to the world of Zoom and FaceTime, you can schedule a book club visit with her. Ask her all your own private questions for your book club, and she'd be more than happy to chat with you guys and talk to you about her new book. Once again, The Codebreaker's Secret, which you can get a signed copy of at adventuresbythebook.com. The link is in your fortune cookie in the middle of your screen. I hope you do get a copy of that because it's really a fascinating read. And we enjoyed chatting with you. So let's see. I think that's it. So just remember that this is part 1 in a 6-part series. Each week, we're going to have a different author come. So you can add this book to your to-be-read list this fall. Pick it up a copy, pick up a couple, get them for, the holidays are going to be coming fast upon us, whether you like it or not. And you can get some of your shopping done early. But next week in part 2, we are hosting New York Times bestselling author Madeline Martin. She's going to be talking about her blockbuster new book, The Librarian Spy. And I'm just thinking, we had secrets today and spies next week. There's a theme brewing, I think.
It's funny. I just got her book in the mail. She sent me a copy, so I'm very excited to read it.
Yeah, I'm picking that up next, and I'm really excited too. So again, as a reminder, I hope you follow Sara on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now on TikTok, as well as on Fireside. Pick up a copy of her book, whether it's the new one, The Codebreaker's Secret, or some of her other books. She'd appreciate that if you have the time. And I hope you make the time. It only takes a few moments to go on Goodreads or Amazon and write a book review. It really means a lot to authors, and it's hard for them to ask, but this is how they get word about their books. This is how publishers see them and support them. So I hope you'll take the time to do that if you pick up a copy of her book, whether it's through a library or you purchase a copy. If you're not familiar with Adventures by the Book, I hope you do become familiar with us. We host not only fireside events, we host Zoom events, including our popular book bingo series, where each section we host 6. Thank you, Anissa. We host 6 authors and play a virtual game of bingo, and we give away prizes. It's a really popular event, and that's on Zoom. We also do in-person events, so you can check out our adventuresbythebook.com website. Most of our events are in Southern California, San Diego. So if you're in the region or want to travel here, make sure to check us out. We even do travels with authors, which I hesitate to say too much about because we're in this COVID world that has just derailed several of our trips, which are driving me crazy. We're trying a new one. We're going to announce this in the next couple of days, that we're doing a readers and writers retreat in beautiful Aspendale, California. It's in the Eastern Sierras, nestled in a grove of aspen trees. We're going to be going in October when all the aspen leaves are changing. We're going to be eating pie and talking about books and talking about writing and taking nature walks and photographing these beautiful trees. And check out our website, adventuresbythebook.com, if you're interested. It should be posted, I'm hoping, in the next couple of days. So it's been a pleasure, Sara. We loved chatting with you about your book, which we loved, and we hope all the readers enjoy it. Thank you. Thank you to those of you in our live virtual audience, and for those of you who asked questions. For those of you on our public profile page listening in, we see you even though you're not in our virtual audience, and we're glad you joined us. And again, those who joined us on our social media channels. So thank you again, and best wishes to you, Sara, on the remainder of all your book events and the success of this book and many more.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Until next time, ask yourself, what is your next adventure by the book? Bye, everybody.
Bye.